Okay, we have quite a lot to discuss this evening. So we'll begin as we have every Tuesday with a chanting of the Great Compassionate Heart Dharani. We come to a pose of meditation, just arriving here in our bodies, in our breath, and in the mind, in the heart. Feeling the straightness of the spine, the breadth and openness of the chest and shoulders. Maybe a slight pulling upwards, right at the crown of the head. Feeling the knees and the seat firmly planted on the cushion. Sitting the way a mountain sits, immovable but open to all that comes. You can begin to bring some awareness to the breath. Feeling the breath like a deep magma moving deep inside the mountain. As we sit together, I invite you to bring to mind an individual who is in need of compassion, but who you find challenging. You can define challenging in any number of ways. But bring to mind this individual who brings challenge to your life. This could be a community member, a family member, someone you know. It could also be a stranger you ran into on the street, at the store. It could even be someone we know collectively in our culture. Bring them to mind and to heart as clearly as you can. Let all contextual information fall away such that you only picture their face, their body, When you have this challenging individual clearly in your mind, invite them to sit with us in this space on the in-breath. And on the out-breath, build around them and yourself a cocoon of soft luminosity. Take care. If this becomes difficult for you, there's no need to grasp tightly at this practice. But that each out-breath adds more and more layers of quiet light around you and this challenging person. If you find this practice scary, uncomfortable, or troubling, don't worry. But I offer you this affirmation. To be fearless is to become a mirror for the Buddhahood of other beings. To be fearless is to become a mirror for the Buddhahood of other beings. Compassionate heart Dharani. Shuraya Shano Shano Momo Amola Recitation of the great compassionate hearted Dharani to all beings in the 3 worlds and 6 realms, and especially to all those affected by death and distress. May they be serene through their difficulties, and may all doubts be cleared. We pray that all beings may prosper and all misfortunes cease. Good evening. I hope you're all having a nice autumn week so far. Perhaps things are getting ramped up for your holiday plans. As an immigrant to the U.S., Thanksgiving was not really part of our family tradition, but definitely an adopted tradition. I remember the first Thanksgiving I remember, we had like fried rice and barbecue pork. My parents didn't know what to do with the turkey, but it is a nice time to gather with friends and family. I also think that it is a good time also to reflect on the challenging history of this nation and its roots in colonialism, and not that you have to have an answer for that or some particular agenda around that, but I think it does enrich actually the whole experience of being with family and friends. It's a safe place to think about these kinds of things and keep them close to your heart. But before we get into tonight's class, I just wanted to check in and see how people are doing in general. Okay. Maybe any reflections that might have come up since our audio and visual experience from last week?
I was trying to remember your quote last week about compassionate contemplation. Yeah, and I don't remember the rest of it.
Compassionate contemplation as the functioning of all phenomena. I can find the exact. It's from Lex Hickson's.
Interbeing, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know. I liked it.
Yeah, me too. It's very wordy, and I like the wordiness because it keeps sort of. I have a hard time pinning it down 100%. So maybe not being able to remember it exactly is is part of the practice of that quote. Other thoughts?
I don't think we debriefed the experience of it, but you know how you set out the paradigm of the different ways we perceive
Mm-hmm.
and how analytical.
Yeah.
It's really hard not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And even with the intention of just looking and seeing and taking in the images and the exercise, I found that my mind so quickly went to, oh, that's this. That's like naming it exactly through those stages that you said. And just, it was very hard to stop that experience and stop, and like intentionally stopping it isn't, I know that that's not the answer, but I don't know if you have a moment to speak any more, or if you will speak more about that tonight.
Yeah, it takes lots of practice, for sure. You know, as an art teacher, I'm going to move this bell because I feel like it's a little bit in the way, but I feel like anywhere I move it will be more in the way. Maybe I'll just take it down like this. You know, as an art teacher, I'm so constantly inundated with images, maybe more so than the average person. So I get a lot of chance to practice this. But you know, I think that you're totally right in saying that the goal is not necessarily to cut off that kind of thinking. You know, it is the natural progression of how we have evolved as seeing and sensing beings. So it's, you know, it's good that it's there. Actually, it helps us survive. It helps us do all kinds of things throughout the day. But I think maybe more importantly is the practice of noticing that it is happening, right? And it's just like a little wedge there to begin with. Like, oh yeah, I'm doing that. I know that I'm going to do that. And this is more, I think, challenging in day-to-day life when we're, you know, running around doing the things we need to do. In a very constructed experience like this, it can be a little bit easier. But I think just having the knowledge that, oh yeah, my mind functions in this technical way, my perception functions in this technical way, it's like just enough space sometimes to begin widening the gap between the stimulus of experience and our response. And this is a very like lifetime kind of practice. You know? Other thoughts? Yeah.
I found the quote.
Mm-hmm.
It was compassionately contemplating the functional interdependence of all things.
And Chase is wondering if you know which exact Lex Hickson book that quote is from.
It comes from the Lex Hickson's translation of the Lotus Sutra. Is that right?
Or is it the Prajnaparamita?
The Prajnaparamita, yeah.
Mother of the Buddhas.
That's right, Prajnaparamita Sutras. Yeah. A very controversial translation.
It's not really so much a translation as I just talked to Ejo about.
Yeah.
As a more of a reflection and his own sort of pondering on it. Because he's coming from a lot of different
Yes, absolutely.
perspectives.
Yeah. Okay. Well, as things come up, please feel free to jump. Oh, yes.
I'll just, sorry. I was just struck by how varied the images were. And although I knew the subject was compassion, it just, I feel like I'm still processing it.
Yeah. And I think that's right. The compassion, as we've been talking about, has so many different manifestations culturally, and through this practice we're looking at compassion in actually quite a subtle and I'd say unfamiliar way. So the images, I think, seem to reflect that deeply. And I agree with the diversity of the imagery, but it was interesting. I also began noticing certain themes. Family and motherhood was a theme. Nature was a theme. The play between like revered individuals of reverence, like great teachers, the Buddha, these sorts of things. So it is nice to see that there are these like relationships across the images. But yeah, that they do reflect, I think, a deep place of mysterious kind of
And just like
activity.
somewhere so
you know.
big and somewhere so small and like intimate and just, I don't know. I'm just really struck by the variety.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good. I'm glad we don't all have the same image. You know. Well, today we're going to continue our practice and talk about embodiment. And I feel very lucky that Untitled Angel taught about the physical, the embodied nature of our practice and lineage, that it's not based in abstraction or theory, right? That our particular lineage in Soto Zen is really about the direct and physical truth of awakening that is passed down from ancestor directly to ancestor, continuing moment by moment in our own lives. And so far we've been focused primarily on the imaginal, which I would argue is a function or a part of our physical embodied being. But that perception of seeing and perception of hearing, that as we've been cultivating a wider, more subtle understanding of compassion in how we see and how we hear, by cultivating the eye that seeks interrelation, cultivating the eye that relinquishes preconception, and then cultivating the eye, heart, mind, body that comes to awe. Instead of what Jiko was describing as a sort of grasping, extractive, rationalizing mind. As we've been studying this, we have been really dealing in the realm of imagery, of sound, of these kinds of ways of perception. But I want to discuss tonight how we encounter this mysterious, great, compassionate heart through our physicality. So, I think that this can be challenging practice for a lot of folks, just like in our education system in the West, we tend to progressively educate less and less the whole body, but really just like this part of the body, like the left brain. So we I think have lots of missed opportunities in our education culture to think about the body really as an organ of knowing, as this full embodiment is an organ and sense organ for knowing the world. We're very lucky in many ways that in our tradition there are many, many, many forms we have been handed down, physical forms, ways that we move, ways that we sit, ways that we eat, ways that we cook, ways that we clean. These are all forms that actually, I think, are direct gateways to this mysterious, compassionate functioning of all phenomena. And we will talk about that in some detail. Of course, perception, the eyes, the mouth, the ear, the nose, we can't separate them from the body. But I think we can sort of look at these experiences in sort of careful analysis, and we can work with them to expose more subtlety about this great compassionate heart. It's like so interesting to me as a weaving teacher and a sewing teacher, as someone who teaches people to use their hands and their bodies. I feel very lucky to have this particular way in the world. It's amazing, and those of you who do any kind of craft or engaged in, there's always this moment when I'm with my weaving students where they're like, when they're getting into the rhythm, when they're like, when things are going well, they're sort of like, oh, it's so nice, my mind can like turn off, right? And I argue with them often that, no, this is actually not your mind turning off. This is actually your mind, the organ of awareness, moving through the rest of your body, right? That your hands have a great wisdom, your feet have a great wisdom, and sort of the full functioning of all of these parts of the body that we experience as the mind turning off. You don't have to be a fiber artist or a weaver, certainly, to experience this. You may have experienced it walking, going on a hike up a mountain, or gardening, or preparing a meal. It's a very, very incredible experience. Often we notice, oh, I don't have to think. My hand knows where to cut the carrot. My foot knows where to step on the path. I want to share a story that I think is very illuminating. It is, I could not find to whom the story is attributed, to what ancestor, but in my research it wasn't clear. I'll confer with Ejo a little bit more and see if I can find the name of this fellow. But a very beautiful story. It's about a monk who lived centuries ago, I believe in China. And his practice was located in the middle of a city, a very populous city. The monk became very aware of all the noisy city sounds, factories, markets, traffic in the streets. And so in search of silence, he left his practice place in the city and went deep into the woods. And he set up his meditation place there in the woods. But in the woods, the monk became aware of all the noisy forest sounds, right? So animals calling out to each other, roaring rivers, insects buzzing at all hours. So the monk left this practice place in the woods, and he went up high in the snowy mountains, and he set up his practice place there. But in the mountains, the monk became aware of all the noisy high mountain sounds, right? Wind howling, eagles screeching, etc. And so the monk left their practice place in the mountains and went deep into the caves and set up their practice place in this darkness and silence of the cave. But in the deep caves, the monk became aware of the beating of his own heart. And upon hearing this, he had a great understanding. So I love this story. And I think if we listen carefully, we can hear this as a story of sort of an ignorant monk who's sort of missing the point, or can't find clarity, is too agitated. And I think that's fine. I think it is a story about the challenges of meditation and how we confront them. I mean, I experienced that here also. We live in our temple home is in a neighborhood with lots of cars, sometimes blaring music, barking dogs, all these kinds of things. But I invite you to think of this story another way. This story is really about this monk's awareness of his outward physical environment in each place, and how that compels his inquiry inwards to the heart, right? In so many ways, I think that this is a very beautiful and direct description. It's so important, I think, that the final sound that this monk hears is his heart. And you can think about this as, of course, the physical heart that is moving blood. But I also think it is the heart of great compassion. And so by now, I think you should recognize that this great compassionate heart is not just like my physical heart or your physical heart or some warm feeling or kind of set of meritorious actions or service. That the great compassionate heart, as we have been studying it, is the heart at the core of all interrelated phenomena, right? It is the co-creation and co-arising of all things functioning with us, as us, around us, itself consciousness, right? So this is very different. It can be hard to begin to divorce our sense, our definition of compassion as like I'm caring actively for someone, or I'm caring actively for something. This compassion is the total functioning of phenomena, right? Ourselves included. That this world arises and we are part and with it, right? There's a great compassion in this arising together. Physical arising, emotional arising, spiritual arising, the arising of phenomena, right? And that in the story, it is, just as Ejo taught, the monk's awareness is detail all the way down, right? Each arising phenomena in each moment, he doesn't know what to do with it, so he moves to a different place, but re-encounters, right, this sort of myriad beings. Each time he encounters this, it brings him closer and closer to this heart of the matter, this great compassionate heart that is in phenomena. And I love as Ejo describes it, it's love, right? It is love. But that it is the knowledge of this physical body, the physical surroundings of the body, that brings this monk to this great awareness of the heart of all being. So our lineage, our very precious lineage, as I said, offers us scores of ways to come to knowledge of our physical being and its compassionate interrelation, its compassionate functioning with other phenomena. And I like to think about the temple kind of as an oven for this kind of activity. It is definitely available everywhere. It is not just the function, or it's not just that it is bound to a temple, but really the temple is a place where we are handed down these forms of practice that allow us to have a chance to exercise this awareness of this compassionate interrelation of beings and of phenomena. We often call them forms when we talk about these practices, but they're about how we bow, right? How we sit, how we arrange ourselves for ceremonies and ritual. It's about oryoki, all the way down to how we set up the cushions and place incense and light candles. If you've been here for a while, you notice we take a lot of scrutiny into how we do this. And I think that this is one of the ways which we are using the physical body and the physical space to come to a greater awareness of interrelation, of this sort of interrelated functioning of all things. So we use the word form often, but I'd like to use another word to describe these activities, and it's a word that many of you may be familiar with. The word is mudra. Are you familiar with this word, mudra? Sort of classically, we think of a mudra specifically as a hand gesture. So, think about gasho as a kind of mudra. The images of the Buddha in meditation touching the earth, right? This is a mudra, the mudra of the Buddha's awakening, the earth witness mudra, right? When you see Ejo doing certain ceremonies, he's making many different hand gestures, right? These are all mudras. And they each have sort of specific symbolic meaning. When we look at Buddhist art, we can sort of decode the various physical gestures, the various mudras, and understand kind of what the teaching is there. But another way we can think of mudra is as a physical shape we take on, sometimes just with the hands, like in gasho, but sometimes with the whole body, like in a prostration, or sometimes with many bodies, like in circumambulation, when we walk around new ordinees. Rather than thinking of these shapes of the body just as having like some symbolic meaning or some narrative value in a ceremony, I'd like to invite you to think about them as spiritual gateways, right? About arranging the body to allow for a kind of physical knowledge, a physically embodied knowledge to enter the body. And it's sort of through these shapes that we can also become aware of this mysterious, great, compassionate heart that courses through all physical shapes, right? Ourselves included, but also the candles and the cushions, the other beings, other practitioners. So if we take gasho, which is such a, maybe the most common example. Zazen, of course, is the big one. We'll get to Zazen in a moment. But think about gasho, when we press our hands together, when we meet somebody, or when we are expressing gratitude, right? I love this description that Ejo's teacher once described, that the gasho is like there's no gap, there's no space, it's complete intimacy, complete direct interconnectedness. It's such a beautiful mudra, such a beautiful way to think about how to meet someone. And I really recommend this. I've never done it before, but I did it in preparation or thinking about this class. make gasho at yourself in the mirror and see what happens there. Some very interesting things move, I think sometimes starting out in practice, forms like this, mudras, they can feel rather unusual to a lot of us. There was a great question this Sunday about cultural appropriation and feeling the strangeness of that. And I think that that's sacred data when you feel that strangeness. It is true that in the West we don't have this gesture so clearly in religious practices. It may seem that way at first, but actually, when you think about Western culture and the gesture of prayer, right, there is something deeply energetic and powerful about this gesture relating to sort of spiritual gateway. So it exists in many cultures. The point is not to I'm not trying to find justification for gasho in a society where we're very conscious of cultural appropriation, just to say that the body is very wise. Beyond even our socialization, our cultural constructions, there are gestures of the body which are deeply ingrained, all the way down to, I've read this beautiful idea that we humans find it very calming physically to look at the tops of trees. Have you read this or heard this before? Sort of like, if you're feeling anxiety, just look at the tops of trees and you will feel an immediate kind of relaxation. And the theory behind this is when we were little apes at one time scurrying around, we looked to the tops of trees for safety, right? Because we would climb up the tree and that's where we're safe. And we carry that physical shape in us today, which I think is very beautiful. It's the same reason why we like seeing water, right? It's sort of like, we know that life-sustaining water is present. That's why we like glittery, shiny things. It's because our minds have been trained to seek those out in the wilderness, right? So there are these physical realities of our bodies that have very, very deep wisdom beyond sort of socialization and cultural construction, Or, I think prostration is another really excellent example of a shape of the body we take on. We're not just bowing with our hands, we're bowing with the entire body, with our head, with our heart, with our stomach, right? And as we make prostration, we're feeling the earth as we come down, and we're feeling the earth and its gravity as we stand up again. We see clearly through the experience of the body, right, my reliance on all of this planet, And it's not symbolic, again, which I think is very interesting to think about. It's not sort of a symbolism, though there's beautiful symbolism, the idea of pouring the head out, right, the idea of fully sort of lifting up the Buddha's feet with the hands. But in another way, right, these shapes are direct ways in which the functioning of the earth itself is a way that we can experience compassionately, and that it is gravity it's gravity upon which we stand and fall and stand up again, as Ejo has described, right? And so, of course, there's the Mudra of Zazen, which is actually the primary focus of what I want to talk about this evening. There are there's so many forms of meditation, and there's so many teachings around meditation in different schools, but really, Zazen, this primary posture of the body which we take up, is directly related to this line of thinking that we're engaged in, right? That we activate the body in time and in space to enter this sort of spiritual gateway, this gateway of the great compassionate heart at the core of all phenomena. Now, Ejo has said this before, and I believe I like to think one day there will be a book about the false dharma of Star Wars. And I love Star Wars, but it is, this is just what happens, I think, when Eastern philosophical ideas get consumed by Hollywood, Western culture. You get some very strange things going on. So, again and again, the whole narrative of Star Wars is actually about a monk who breaks his vow, right? If you want to talk about this some other time, I'm happy to talk about it. But, it makes sense that he ends up breaking his vow. He's being told constantly to clear his mind, cancel out his thoughts, right? It's clear your mind, clear your mind. There's another what I'm trying to say, there's another moment in the film where Yoda, and I'm going to make the Yoda voice, says, luminous beings are we, not this crude material. Right? Remember this moment in the first Star Wars. I think that's so wrong, right?
Can you say again, please?
Luminous beings are we,
Oh.
not this crude material.
Oh, gotcha.
And I don't mean to like argue with Master Yoda, but we are crude beings. We are physical beings, right? And therein lies the luminosity, right? It's not that it is one or the other, but actually the physicality we experience is also the luminosity we experience. And this is very evident, I believe, in Zazen. Yes, go ahead.
I'm just nodding. Oh, you're talking about somebody else.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
James.
Yo, you might find this interesting. So years and years ago, I was staying at the Vedanta Center of Southern California, and I had the opportunity to sit and watch The Empire Strikes Back with a group of monks who had never seen it before. And when it came to that particular scene, one of them just goes, "That's Vedanta."
Oh.
And so that's, just thinking the good difference between Vedanta and Zen. It was your response is polar opposite.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear, actually. Yeah. There's so many different. This is sort of what I'm saying. There's so many different approaches, but in our particular school of Zazen, this is how we approach it. Thank you for clarifying that.
No, I'm not saying anything, just the similarity of the experience of listening to you say one thing and 20 years ago.
Sure.
It's very similar to saying something almost quite opposite.
So this Mudra of Zazen, this posture of Zazen, we can study very directly this gateway of the great compassionate heart. Many of you who have taken the intro to meditation, maybe some of you took this years and years ago, you will remember, and some of you who are teaching it now, we began sort of with three physical postures, or three postures, the posture of the body, the posture of breath, and the body of mind. And I think that in the intro to Zazen moment, we don't actually get very much time to talk about this further. And so I want to spend most of the rest of the evening talking about these three postures, these physical gateways, and sort of think about them in relationship to this mystery of the functioning, the compassionate functioning of all phenomena, which the great compassionate heart Dharani calls us towards. So of course, the first posture we think about is the physical posture of sitting, right? And many of you here have been practicing for quite a while now. We know lots about arranging legs, knees touching the ground, this sort of thing. This is not exactly where I want to go with this analysis, but I want to think more about the entirety of the forms around Zazen, right? So why do we bow at the cushion and then bow behind us? Why do we rock left and right, etc.? These whys are not sort of doctrine, they're not doctrinal, but they're maybe a reflection, a way to sort of imagine these physical postures as gateways or as explorations of this great functioning, this great compassionate functioning. So when we bow at the cushion and we bow behind us, right, we're acknowledging our arrival in physical space, right? It's so beautiful, actually. It's so rare we get to arrive anywhere. Most of the time when we're coming to a place, we're just trying to get what we need out of it, right? Go to the grocery store, go to the bank, go to school. We rush into meetings, we rush into conversations, we rush into meals, all of this rushing. But for Zazen, we actually orient our body to an acknowledgement of, I'm arrived. I am arriving. I'm arriving at this cushion, I'm arriving in this Sangha, I'm arriving in this temple, right? Again, it is not symbolic. It is an actual orientation, a physical orientation. When we sit down, right, and we are instructed to rock left and right, it's sort of, oh yes, the right requires the left requires the right. They both create the center, right? This notion of opposition and oneness is like directly emergent there. right? There's a practical function also, right? We're sort of finding this center of our physical being, but in that, again, a gateway opens up. What is left? What is right? What do I think about in opposition, right? What is it I think about as oneness and centeredness, right? Of course, we make the cosmic mudra of meditation in Zazen. I don't know if anyone can see it. You have this meditation, this mudra of meditation. And think about this shape, right? There's so much reflected in what we are doing with our bodies, just in this mudra, right? The sort of openness, right? The stability, number one, of the hands, carrying each other, but also the openness that they create, right? This emptiness, right? Which is so reflected in the enso of the Zen school, so reflected in the circular shape that breathing creates, right? All of these things contained in this simple gesture, right? As we sit, as sitting prolongs, right, we begin to feel pain, right, discomfort. We may experience all kinds of physical reactions to the process of sitting. But notice also the way in which just the slightest awareness of a pain here or a pain there, of numbness here or numbness there, how sharp that brings our mind to attention of of the reality of being, right? You don't need lots of study of sutras, lots of theory to know, oh yeah, right? I age, right? Sickness, aging, death. These are moment-to-moment realities. They are not, they are the function of the body, right? They're not like outside of this physical reality. And it is so immediate, so accessible in Zazen, you know. Earlier, when I was talking, when we were working through this sort of meditative practice, I asked you to think of yourself as a mountain, right? And I love this image that comes up very often in many teachings about the posture, the physical posture of meditation, right? But the sort of stability of the mountain comes from its connectedness to the valley, right? That it is not somehow separate from the landscape, right? The mountain sort of continues into the valley continues into the mountain. And our stability, our physical stability, is like that also. Like we become aware of, again, the presence of gravity, how we rely on that to be upright. All of these things are directly, can be directly accessed through this physical posture of Zazen. Breath, too, is like this, right? And we often talk about the body maybe is very, it seems very tangible. Breath is a little bit more mysterious, or a little bit more intangible. As we're breathing, we become aware of the mysterious no boundary between inside and outside. Like, when does breath become me? When does the me that is exhaling become the rest of the world? And in this sort of physical process, this sort of breathing, right, we directly experience this reliance, again, on the myriad beings that allow for oxygen, for nitrogen, etc. All of these gases that are being produced by the trees and by the ocean, on and on and on. Now, of course, this is not necessarily the primary thing we should be thinking, or, you know, this may be a way to understand breath, but actually the experience of breath may be simply the physical reality of expansion of diaphragm, right? That we can feel our body pressing up against the outside. We can feel the outside pressing into our bodies. This is a direct expression, I think, of, again, this interrelation of these myriad phenomena in ourselves, which arise together in Zazen. I also think to begin to take on a practice of becoming aware of the shape which breath takes. And I think this is often very confusing. I think you might hear this a lot from yoga instructors and from meditation instructors. What is the shape of your breath, or what is the texture of breath? I want to talk about that for a moment. You know, I think that as we sit and as sitting becomes more prolonged, we can actually begin to sense the various kind of formations, energetic formations, which the breath starts to create, right? So some might experience the breath as this kind of circular shape, right? In breath, out breath, in breath, out breath. And so to be aware, it maybe a shape like that emerges for you in your Zazen. Also, perhaps a shape like this might emerge, right? Sort of in breath, out breath, the kind of rising and falling of the musculature. You can also begin to feel perhaps a circular breathing that in breath brings awareness to the top of the head, and out breath rains in awareness down the spine, and then through the seat, and then back up again. Right? These are all very subtle awarenesses of the body. Right? As we breathe, we are moving oxygen throughout all of these capillaries, all of these tiny blood vessels, and when we make the space to be aware of it, very mysterious kinds of sensations can arise in the body. We can begin to feel the functioning of even tiny nerve endings in various parts of our body that we weren't aware of before. Right? And I would take all of these as, again, ways to feel the connection between all of the tiny components of our physical being on the inside. All of this can be explored in breath. Posture of mind is one that we don't talk about too much in our intro to meditation experience, if you remember. And that it's, I think, frankly, because mind is something that we then explore forever. After the first time we sit, mind becomes a great kind of exploration. And many of you have heard this sort of idea of thought and mind as sky and cloud. Are people familiar with this idea that the mind is like a clear skies, and then thoughts are like clouds that emerge? Is this familiar to people? That the clouds do nothing to impede the sky, and the sky does nothing to impede the mind. One simply holds the other, and the other is held. I think that's helpful. A great way to begin, at least. But in other ways, I think this can be kind of abstraction. It is symbolic. It is image-oriented, and can be confusing because of that. But I would also invite you to think about the mind in Zazen as a fully functioning organ, right? So that the heart, right, is like an organ which moves blood. The lungs are the organ which move air. The mind is the organ which moves thought. It is physically doing its fully functional purpose, right? So that we tend to have a relationship with thoughts as very, very abstract, kind of like, we have so many different kind of analogies. Like a file, the mind is like a file folder, and my memories and thoughts are like files. I move them around that way, etc. But I would encourage you to think about the physical reality of the mind as this interlocked, complex structure, which is moving thought. That is what it does, just like breath and blood are being moved by these other organs. I think when we take on that posture, when we sort of think of the mind in that way, it can help alleviate a little bit of this self-flagellation that we do when we're trying to clear our minds, as the Jedi Masters have recommended. That actually this incredible opening can happen when we appreciate the sort of incredible functioning of the mind as an organ which does exactly what it's supposed to, which is move thought. Now, I think each of these postures, body, breath, and mind, we can also approach with these same ways which we've been approaching images, right? So when we approach body, when we approach breath, when we approach mind, we can see them through the eye of interconnectedness, right? So we can perceive body and the way it is interconnected. We can see breath and interconnection there. We can see mind, interconnection there. We can see each of these things also by relinquishing our preconceptions, right? Body, we have so many ideas about our bodies, preconceived notions about what the body is. And I guarantee 60% of those notions are about how you look. And then a lot of them, maybe 30, are about how you feel today, pain in my hip or in my back. And then probably 10% are more mysterious realm of are my physical sensations in my body or in my mind kinds of things. And we have so many preconceptions based on these three ideas. And in Zazen, we can relinquish those preconceptions and become more directly aware of the functioning of the body, mind as well. Preconceptions abound there, but can we relinquish those preconceptions, and in doing that, come to a relationship to awe of the functioning of the body, awe of the functioning of the breath, and awe of the functioning of the mind. And this is precisely the process we go through when we discuss cultivating a subtle awareness of this great compassionate heart, right? We imagine differently this physical being which we occupy. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but it's definitely something that can be practiced actively whenever we sit down for Zazen. Of course, there are many, many physical postures we take on that call us back to this interconnectedness with all phenomena. Driving can become this mudra, right? When you're moving through space, it's like I can drive with a graspy, rational, efficiency mind, and that's probably good that you do that a little bit. But you can also notice, right? Oh my gosh, I'm in this space with all these beings, interconnectedness, right? That person cut me off. I'm so mad at them. What are my preconceptions about why that happened? Maybe they're having an emergency, right? This is something we can practice in so many instances. This can be true pouring a cup of tea, walking through the grocery store, cleaning the bathroom, We tend to call this mindfulness, I think. It's a very popular term. But I often feel a bit of extractive quality when I think of the word mindful. I feel like I'm actively trying to manipulate a situation such that I can be less stressed or find benefit there. This great compassionate heart requires no activity, requires no forcing, right? It is simply the thusness of phenomena, right? And experiencing that, I think, has its own kinds of benefit. Dogen describes how one becomes entangled with the minutiae of daily life as a very important teacher. I think that is why when you come to the temple, we engage so carefully with how we handle objects, how we handle space, how we handle the temple itself, how we encounter these things, because caring for the physical truth of our lives brings us closer, I think, to this great mysterious compassion, which is the functioning of all of these phenomena. Now, I want to end, of course, I'm going to end a little bit early because I want to have some time for questions, but it's so hard, I think, to know this in the moment that it's happening. It's very rare, actually. We can strive towards that, and I think that the great sages probably spend a lot of their time checking themselves. Or to become a great sage, I imagine there's a lot of checking oneself and how we interact with each next phenomena which arrives. Am I grasping at it? Am I trying to be rational, extractive, evaluative? Or am I, as Rose is describing this difficulty, am I approaching it with this kind of relinquishment, with this eye of interconnectedness and this eye of awe? But when it happens, I hope that you take time to write it down. I want to share with you just a short story where I experienced this, and I tend to not I try sometimes not to use myself as an example. I don't think I'm an example of this, but by happenstance, it sort of emerges, And there was a time at the temple when we had a resident, a lovely fellow. His name was Brandon, and I think many of you remember him. And I sat next to Brendan every morning during morning practice for years. It was always just like something I took for granted. And His job during the morning service was to light the candles. So after Zazen, light the candles, and we chant together. So every morning, sit next to Brendan, he lights the candles, we chant together. Sit next to Brendan, he lights the candles. Next morning, sit next to Brendan, light candles, we chant together. And one morning, he chose to end his life, and he was not there. And I remember Zazen ending, and we didn't know what to do. I said, oh, Brandon, we didn't talk about this, we didn't plan for this to happen, and he wasn't there to light the candles. So I just sort of naturally went up to the altar to light the candles. And as I walked in front of the altar, I walked into a hole where his body had been. And I could feel his heart. And I could feel my heart in front of that candle connected through this form. And through that, I could feel every person who had stood in front of a candle to light it in this instance, in this form, in this tradition, back and back and back and forward. Right? This moment of interconnectedness came there. And I remember feeling I could not plan for this to happen. I could not have a preconception that this would occur, right? And in this truly human, this way that is so true to our humanity of coming and going, I was filled with awe at that moment. So this is my story about how it has emerged for me. And I think that it is a sad story in a way, but so often I think these moments are filled with great love and great sadness and great joy, and all the emotions come forth in this awareness of our shared consciousness. So we have some time for questions before. I know that was a lot of information, and I spoke very quickly, maybe faster than I have in the past, but if you have thoughts or need clarification on anything, I'd be happy to try. I will say, all of this is hard teaching. It has been a challenge for me, I think, to find ways to articulate something which is so close to the edge of the end of language. And I think that if it doesn't strike you as clear, or if the things that I'm describing seem very murky, that is also important. I think to it's okay. It's still murky to me as well. But there's so much here that we can mine really over the course of, or we can encounter over the course of a life of practice. Yeah.
Where do you think the boundary is between showing compassion for others and showing compassion for yourself? So at some point, showing compassion for others, you begin to hurt yourself in some ways, and at what point do you find that?
I think that this is a really great example of how we can articulate a difference between compassionate acts and service, which is so important, meritorious deeds, which we discussed in previous class, and also this other compassion, which is this mysterious total functioning of all phenomena. I think what you're articulating is a really clear example of how compassionate acts and compassionate service can always have at their core a kind of extractive quality, right? A transactional quality. So we give, we show compassion, and we realize at a certain point it is taking a toll, right? It simply does because that is the nature of transactional reality, of the sort of wheel turning reality, right? You cannot have action without cause. There cannot be, this is sort of a law of Isaac Newton, but also a law of the Dharma, right? That when we turn the wheel that way, we can get crushed by it. Right? So I think that having awareness, right, that compassionate acts, service have limitations is actually a very important lesson. That I don't think we should seek to ever damage ourselves or get to a point where we're showing, or we're harming ourselves. Right? That would not be compassion for ourselves, right? But that we can start to have an awareness of how we can see the wheels turning, we can see the manipulation happening, and that the compassionate acts will always have a quality of that, right? They're so important to do. We have to do them, but to recognize that we are limited beings, right? And that there is another kind of compassion which we can cultivate, which is about a limitlessness, right? But full functioning of phenomena. I think that it's different for each person. I think that we are visited on this planet by beings like Mother Teresa, who seem to have unlimited resources for service and compassion. But over practice, over a lifetime of practice, I think we just begin to be aware and build boundaries and know how to do that. But it takes time and takes trial and error. It's a learning process.
I'm thinking about the mind,
Mm-hmm.
and I like the phrase that you, thinking of the mind as, one of our functioning organs, which of course it is, and how it's this interesting relationship to have with the mind of, in Zazen wanting to have this certain quality of relaxed mind or settled mind, settled body, and then fighting against it or wanting it to be different when, I don't know, you're thinking about Thanksgiving dinner or what you want to do, or I don't know, Sky, if you meant part of this, like negative self-talk turned in on yourself, that the mind can be, for me anyway, hurt.
Yeah.
It can hurt. And so then, I don't know what the question is in this, but it's just like, and of course, if I didn't have a fully functioning mind, I wouldn't be able to be here to talk to you. I mean, I could be in a coma or, some kind of dementia.
Right.
So I don't know.
Yeah,
it's an interesting organ.
So I like this conversation. I wish we had more time to talk about it. But I'll talk about it in this way. Posture of the body, right? We think of the earth as sort of, is the earth good or evil? It's kind of neutral, right? Nature is beyond good or evil, right? It's simply functioning, right? And we accept that. We accept that there are earthquakes, and we accept that there are naturally occurring forest fires. Of course, there's climate change. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that the earth functions in both a creative and destructive way, right? We think about breath, right? It's also very similar, right? Sometimes qualities of breath, like we can feel the choking, we can feel the shortness of breath, we feel the coughing, we also feel the openness and the freedom. Mind is this way as well, right? It isn't different. There are luminous components of mind, and there are challenging components of mind. We tend to think of it as like, it's me. I'm the one inflicting that upon myself. But I would encourage, in the Surangama Sutra, which I brought here, and I'm glad I can bring it up now. It's not the most popular sutra in our canon, but the Buddha talks to Ananda very directly about interconnectedness of mind being a place where, in great samadhi, in concentration, our mind becomes linked with minds of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. And that interconnectedness, right, that greater sense of mind, it can bring with it a kind of openness to other forces, other voices, other negative. The Buddha in this translation uses the word demonic, 10 demonic states, which feels a bit extreme, but I kind of like it, in terms of they sometimes do feel like you're being possessed by other kinds of forces. And if this is something that you're interested in, I would really recommend the way reading the sort of section of the sutra in which she describes the Buddha describes these states, right? These sort of afflicted or these agitated states of mind as beings, right? That are present, part of our assembly of the mind. Part of that interconnectedness is that we are vulnerable to this wider array of this interior world of beings, and that he constantly drives back at this idea that once you understand it, you can sit through it. There are many beings who cultivate mind states, kinds of mind states which are magical, and there are some that cultivate mind states intentionally to flagellate oneself. All of these are present, just like all of these forces are present in a functioning earth. So I don't know if that's helpful in any way, but Surangama Sutra is quite interesting.
And what's the name of the sutra?
Surangama Sutra. Yeah. Not the most popular for all kinds of reasons. There's a lot of focus on hell in this sutra.
Nice. I just wanted to make one comment to that. It just reminds me, I had this one experience in the hospital when I was teaching meditation to a woman who hears voices. And who hears voices? She had a mental illness that she would hear voices, and they were torturous. And I said to her once, just kind of out of the blue, I go, because she came to my meditation group. I said, why don't you just invite them to sit with you? And she kind of, what? And I go, just invite them to sit. Just ask them all if they wanted to sit meditation with you. And she tried it. And she said, actually, sometimes they would be quiet. And they would sit with her. And that was a way that she learned to cope with them. So they didn't become her enemy anymore. Right. She just learned she knew they were part of her.
To be fearless is to become a mirror for the Buddhahood of other beings.
Exactly. So these were beings within her.
Wonderful. Okay, well, this concludes the kind of instructive part of these 4 weeks. Next week, we'll engage in what I hope is a very energetic and interesting experience. We'll be doing a chant along, hour-long chanting of the Daishin Dharani. Please invite friends, family. It'll be on the 30th, so it'll be a Giving Tuesday also. The intention here is that not everyone has to chant. Not everyone doesn't. People are both invited to chant or not chant, or chant as much as they feel comfortable. People are invited to lie down, invited to sort of experience this embodiment and this sonic and very powerful experience. So please be prepared for that. I've now sent out the file for people to practice chanting along with Ejo. Hopefully that's useful. But also, I do have homework for you this week. I would like you to hold in your heart or think about someone to whom you'd like to dedicate the merit of that chanting at the end. So please email me, or you can grab me if we're walking by, and I'll create a special dedication list for this group. And so at the end of the hour-long chanting, I will do the echo and offer the merit that we generate through that hour-long chanting to those individuals. It could be just someone who's having a hard time, it could be a group of people. Keep an open heart around it. If you've never,
Can it be someone who's passed away?
Sure.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
So hopefully that will be a powerful experience for everyone involved. Okay.